Today we cover a game in which case international master Lawrence Trent went with the Hippopotamus Defense in the I'm Not a GM tournament. Let's just say things didn't go too well. Let's take a look at why. Okay. Now, before we start the game, I gotta say, right, it's good not to just go over the greatest games of all time, not just go over all the wins and whatever opening you choose, right? I'm a huge Hippopotamus Defense fan. That is what I play in tournament chess. That's what got me to National Master. But we all have our openings, right? Let's just say you play the Scotch Gambit, for example. It's good not to just cover all the wins in the Scotch Gambit, the greatest Scotch Gambit games ever. It's also good to cover losses because that can show you what to avoid. And that's what we're doing in this video with the Hippo. So we have this move of e4. We have b6, bishop e7, and okay, we got g6 here. Black here going for a double fianchetto. I definitely have some issues with this personally as I'm playing the Hippo, but there are, tons of players that do it. And it seems to work out just fine for a lot of players. So, okay, castling kingside, d6, knight d7, right? c3, e6, right? We're fianchettoing our bishops. We're tucking our knights. It's all pretty straightforward up to this point. But here after bishop e3, I personally think that castling is a mistake as a Hippo player because this allows white to play queen d2 and easily drop their bishop into h6. And the bishops are the soul of the Hippo. The bishops are what make the Hippo such a dangerous system and weapon, no matter what color you're playing. Okay, and queen d2, bishop h6, we're going to lose our bishop, or we're going to have to play like rook e8 and drop our bishop back or something crazy. It's just not very comfortable. So instead of castling, I would play the move of h6, right? Or a6 here, right? Either one. Okay, but we want to get that position, in which case we're playing h6 and a6. And by castling here, we're not guaranteeing that we're going to be able to pull this move off. All right, so that's something to think about. Stockfish really likes this move of queen d2 for white, but in the game, we have white going with this move of knight b to d2. And okay, we were able to get h6 off. I think black maybe, dodged a bullet there a little bit, but okay, we have queen e2 and king h7. I think this is another mistake from, Lawrence Trent, who, by the way, is a much stronger player than I am. But I think in the Hippo, king h7 in this instance is not the best idea because you have a bishop looking directly at the king. And what is the purpose of playing king h7? The purpose is to defend h6, right? To defend h6. Or maybe get your king off of this diagonal, right? The a2 to g8 diagonal. But in this case, there's no reason to get off of this diagonal. There's nothing there, right? On top of that, h6, okay, I mean, we have one attacker, one defender. What else is going to join in for white putting pressure on that pawn? The queen can't do it anymore, right? Maybe later in the game, but the queen has no way to attack this pawn. So in this kind of position, we got to realize, okay, my king is pretty safe here on this diagonal. That's good news. On top of that, h6, there's really nothing else that can gang up on it that's already there, right? That this knight can't do it, this knight can't do it. Obviously, the light square bishop can't do nothing. And again, the queen can't get involved. So in this case, what we're really doing is overprotecting a pawn, which white can't really attack anyways, and we're putting our king directly into the line of fire. All right, so this is definitely a mistake, and it's a costly one. We have this move of rook a d1, and now we have f5. I think this is another error for black. We'll cover why in a moment, but I'm just going to start out by saying, guys, when we're playing the Hippo, we got to go for that slow burn approach, right? We're playing this move of a6. Okay, now, I don't know how many of you guys have done, survival stuff. I'm not going to sit here and say that I even have, all right? I mean, when I was growing up, and he's still there, by the way, by my parents' house, but when I was growing up, one of my neighbors is huge into survival, and he would, do little things on how to start a fire and all this kind of stuff. And I've watched shows or whatever. I'm going on a little bit of a tangent here, but okay, I've watched survival shows. When you start a fire, right, you don't just grab a tree and try to set the tree on fire. I mean, obviously obviously who would do that? But okay, what am I trying to say? You can't just grab huge logs, right, and just start a fire like that. You got to start small, right? Twigs, right? And slowly build your way up. That is my approach to the Hippo. Okay, so by playing a6 here, we're building a fire, but we're not in a rush, right? We're very slowly, right? Very slowly building up, okay? Maybe the next move we play something like b5. Maybe the next move we play something like knight b6, start looking at something like d5 or c5. Maybe get some support in there with a move like rook c8, right? Maybe at some point play something like knight f6, right? And if they push, okay, reroute to d5, right? Okay, in this case, you probably don't want to play g5 because of the bishop right against your king. But at the end of the day, we have a very solid setup, and we're kind of inviting white to go crazy against it, right? And that's exactly what the opponent shouldn't do against the hippo. Okay, the hippo shouldn't just attack because they're actually going to leave cracks in the wall for us to take advantage of. White as well needs to be careful when going up against the hippo. Okay, but that's kind of the dance, right? We're both slowly improving, but if one side strikes too fast, they're going to pay for it. And that's what happens here. Rook d1, we have this move of f5. This is not a great idea because white can take, and the second that they do, all they got to do is move a bishop, and guess what? You got a rook and a queen, I mean, just pouncing down on the e-file, specifically this e6 pawn. The second thing I'll say is that when white takes, and we take back with the knight, the bishop's getting closer to kind of eyeing up that king. I mean, it's just feeling like this king's a little bit vulnerable. Now, is there more in the way? In a sense, yes, but in another sense, g6 no longer has a pawn supporting it. So the second this knight moves, this pawn's kind of on its own in terms of pawn support, right? So I think that black here has a little bit of an iffy situation. And white here should have just continued with a move like bishop f4. Get that bishop out of the way and just start pouncing down on that e6 pawn, right? It's a weakness, okay? g6 is weaker, e6 is weaker. And I'm not saying never to play f5, but what I will say is that if you play f5, you usually don't want a bishop aimed right towards your king, and you usually don't want the opponent to be able to just pounce down on your e-file. Now, if they have a bishop stack or something, go for it. But in this case, not the best timing. Now, white plays knight e4, not the best move possible. We now have a6 from black, and I think that this is a little bit late, right? It's not really in the right order. Okay, the position's already kind of opened up. Now we're trying to play a little bit slower, and it's not going to work out, okay? Bishop c1 from white. Okay, queen e7, great move. Queen e7 developing, you know, putting some extra protection on that e6 pawn. And now we have knight g3. Okay, now, in all honesty, I was using Stockfish for this move. This is, you know, up to this point, this is all kind of knowledge that you get by playing the hippo a ton. I mean, I've been playing this for years, studying it like crazy. This move here, Stockfish showed me. Okay, but the move is e5, and it's actually pretty strong. Might seem counterintuitive to push this pawn as just such a weakness, but in all honesty, it's a lot less weak on e5 with all of these guys supporting it than it was on e6 with only a queen supporting it. Okay, so, you know, e5 is definitely a move here. By the way, if you take on e5, we can take on g3 with tempo, right? You can't just do something like that because, well, I mean, I guess you could, but you lose your queen. And if you take the knight, then we have knight takes e5, and black here is doing okay. 2 active bishops, and we're doing well, right? Bishops are the soul of the hippo, and both of them are very active here. Going back to e5, what happens if black, loses their knight here right away with knight takes f5 from white? Well, here I'm going to say take with the g pawn, and if d takes, now we're going to take back with the d pawn. This is a key idea in the hippo, right? If you have some kind of position, like, for example, I'm going to go back real quick. Okay, like in this position, we're not going to take back with the pawn because the pawn would be by itself, and it's just not doing that much, okay? It doesn't have that many options. It's not supporting many options. But going back to this situation, now we will take with this pawn. Why? Because there's a pawn right next to it. And because these pawns are side by side, they don't just cover, 2 light squares or 2 dark squares. They cover 4 squares straight, right? Half of the 4th rank, this pawn, right, supports this pawn to going to f4, and f5 supports the e pawn to going up to e4, right? e4 is a move that, white needs to be concerned about, looking to fork both the knight and the bishop. And in a ton of Stockfish lines, it has black playing e4 next, right? Just pouncing on that knight, pouncing on the bishop. I mean, this bishop's, helping out. This bishop's getting more scope. Pawn side by side, when you can get it in the hippo, great idea. Great idea. Okay. Knight g3. What do we have in the game? We have this move of knight takes knight. And after F takes, we have rook F E8. This is kind of what sealed the deal. I think up to this point, black wasn't losing. I'm not going to sit here and say black's position was great. I mean, it's honestly pretty unpleasant. I mean, we got a battery ram on E6, this bishop looking right at our king, which is defending a very vulnerable G6 pawn. But I think a good move here for black would have been, again, E5 or even rook F6. I don't mind this move because it protects both of the weak pawns. But when you play rook F E8, you do protect E6, but then you got to start worrying about the pawn on G6, okay, which is what happens here. White plays knight H4. We see Lawrence Trent go with knight F8. White continues to build the pressure with queen G4. We now got 1, 2, 3 pieces attacking it. In the game, we got king H8. Let's just take a look real quick if black plays something like queen F7, right? Now we got 3 defenders on that pawn. Is everything fine? It's not because of rook F1. And, bishop F6, there's a lot of different ways that white can kind of break through and win this position, but I think a simple way is just queen F4, right? I mean, double, battery ram on that bishop. If we move the bishop, we lose the queen. If we defend the bishop with the knight, guess what? Bishop takes G6 with check. That's not good. And if we defend the bishop with the king, well, we realize that H6 is falling. The king's forced back. We lose another pawn, right? The bishop flies in. There's just so many ways that white can go about this. I mean, white could take on G7 and then capture our rook. White could keep the queen on the board. At the end of the day, this is just straight losing, straight lost. I mean, we're down material, and talk about an active, infrastructure for white to work with here. So going back, we got queen G4. Black continues the move of king H8, just trying to get out of dodge, but white just continues here by taking material, threatening mate. Here, bringing that rook to the open F file, and now bishop takes H6. Black resigns here, and it makes sense at this level, right? We got 2 international masters going up against each other, and Lawrence Trent. There's just not much hope here. I mean, rook G8. We lose the bishop, or even queen H5, and looks pretty good. If rook F7, queen H5. White's, looking at bishop F8 check ideas, potentially, and other stuff as well. And if king G8, rook F4, this is just it. So what are the takeaways, right? What are some things that we want to avoid when playing the hippo? Okay. What are some things? Well, again, going back to the start, right? So we have this move of knight B D2. White kind of missed an opportunity here. The reason for that is going back a couple more moves. Black castled. White could have played queen D2 and got their bishop into H6 pretty easily. Black really can't do much about that, and really just capture off our bishop. And again, the bishops are the soul of the hippo. So going back, what do we do here? Well, if bishop E3, we got to play H6, right? Or A6, but basically it's too early to castle. Now, in a lot of situations, if you play H6 and let's say white plays queen E2 or something, okay, castling's totally okay now because they still can't get into H6 because of king H7, right? So that's something to keep in mind, okay? That's something to keep in mind, all right? But, don't be in a rush to castle. That's one big takeaway. In the hippo, don't be in a rush to castle. When I'm teaching kids in SoCal how to play chess, how to, how to move the pieces, all that kind of stuff, very soon after, one of the things I teach them is opening principles, right? I'm not teaching them opening theory. I'm just teaching them 4 basic steps. Put a pawn in the center, castle, connect the rooks, activate the rooks. The second step was castling. In the hippo, that's not the case, okay? In regular chess, we want to castle fast. In the hippo, we're not in a rush at all. In fact, our king is extremely safe on E8 here. I mean, oftentimes more safe than it is on the king side or the queen side. So we keep this king in the center. We make white guess where we're going. If they attack one way, we go the other, and vice versa, right? So don't be in a rush to castle, and get your full thick-skinned hippo with moves like H6 and A6 when the moment calls, okay? So that's one start. On top of that, H6 is good here. King H7, it's not necessary. Sometimes it is, right? In a previous position I just showed, we got to play King H7 to defend the pawn. In this case, there's nothing that is going to attack this pawn more than the bishop is. And on top of that, we're just walking the king into the line of fire for no needed reason, right? The king was perfectly safe on G8. So that's one thing to think about as well, right? And finally, F5, too soon. Right, again, when we're playing the hippo and we're starting a fire, we're not grabbing trees, we're not grabbing logs and trying to set them with a match. We are starting with twigs, right? Grabbing weeds. We're grabbing tiny little objects, slowly getting a fire going, and then we're going to continue growing it, right? But we're not going crazy right away with a move like F5 here, okay? Play this move A6, right? Finish things out. And then from here, you can assess. Once you get this, okay, let's think about this, right? What do we do here? Let's spend some time. But even then, in a lot of cases, you don't need to be in a rush, okay? Don't be in a rush to castle. Don't be rushing the hippo. I guess the message of this video is don't be rushed. Thanks for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so that you don't miss out on anything coming our way. And on top of that, I wanted to give a big shout out to my Patreon supporters for the month of November in 2023. Big love to y'all. If you're interested in becoming a Patreon member, you can click on a link down in the description below. And in that, you will see all the benefits, including one in which we recently added, which is actually a once a month session with me, in which case we go over patrons games. I'll see y'all in the next one.